You receive a call from your mom telling you that the police wants to talk to her about the death of her husband. He might have been poisoned and they seem to be suspecting her. You think they must have it wrong. Your mom cared for every single person in her life. You discuss it with the police and then go home to console your mom. But then, almost in a whisper, she draws you in and tells you she just wanted to make him sick. As you are struggling to reason with the motive, the police calls you and tells you the situation might be much worse. They are on their way with a warrant to arrest your mother because they suspect she might be a serial killer. This is the story of Velma Barfield. It's been a while. I know. Don't shoot the messenger. Don't shoot the storyteller. It's been a while since there has been food behind me. And you know what having food behind me means? It is the last meals day. It is a Friday and we are back in the game. Last Meals is just one of a few series that I do on this channel where I sit on my fat ass and I eat somebody's last meal. And why are we eating their last meal? Why is it their last meal? Because they have done a bad deed and they landed in prison and then most probably on the death row. Sometimes they cheat, but this time she definitely landed on a death row. Because you listen to the intro, serial killer. Americans don't really want you to repent and reform, especially if you were a serial killer. They just like push you away. They're like, you go to hell. I mean, when you hear the story, by the end of it, you tell me in the comments, do you believe, like Velma believed, that she reached the gateway to heaven and just crossed it? Or do you believe that she landed in hell? Like, I mean, she is a serial killer. I don't think she had much chance. If you are a regular on this channel, first of all, thank you, respect you, bring some more people on, subscribe, like, all of that good jazz. But you probably noticed I do cover a lot of female criminal cases. And that is because there's always some certain level of calculation to their crimes. And the area, the niche that I like researching the least are usually black widows. I don't think I've covered a single one to this day until this very moment on this channel. And that's not because I don't find those cases interesting. It's just the fact that, they usually poison you, get rid of you, move on to the next person. Not Velma. She did have that repetitive streak, but by the end of this video you might realize she's one of the most calculated black widows out there. So let us start from the beginning. Velma was born as Margie Velma Barfield, but she always went by Velma, on October the 29th, 1932, which is also my birth date, and that made me very uncomfortable during this whole research. Scorpios don't want nothing to have with you, Velma, nothing. She was born in rural South Carolina, but was raised near Fayetteville in North Carolina. Velma was the second child and the first daughter of a farmer called Murphy Bullard and his homemaker wife Lily. They would have 9 children together, and because they weren't really well off, they lived on a farm, they didn't really have the outhouse, they didn't have electricity or running water, so they would literally go into the nature to like shower, poop, pee. And this wasn't just the children. Murphy's, the dad's parents, also lived on the farm, and so did his sister. And the sister was disabled and also had polio, so they had to take care of her. So it was just a full house in not the best circumstances where Velma grew up in. Because they were growing their family during the Great Depression, and Murphy was only making the profit from the sales of the tobacco and the cotton that he grew, he was looking for a different job. He got a job as the logger in a sawmill at the Fayetteville textile mill, and this is when the family moved back into his parents' home. Once they moved in, within 1 year's time, both his dad died and then his mom followed suit. But Velma doesn't speak much about this. Velma, you see, wrote a book, an autobiography of sorts, and there was also a book written on her. So this is where some pieces of the research came from. But this is something that both of those books, from what I've seen online, I haven't fully read them, kind of brush past. Velma was more pissed off about the relationship between her parents. In her book, she reproached her mom because her dad seemed to be high-tempered, obviously living during this stressful time. Who wouldn't be, like, with how many mouths to feed? But Velma always took a reproachful view of her mom for not standing up for her children. Her dad, from everything I read, had some anger management issues, was high-tempered, as they described it at the time, was super jealous and possessive, also a cheater himself, but nobody could really predict his mood inside the house. So the whole family would be walking on eggshells, and when he would give Velma a beating for something she had done, after those beatings, Velma would sit and just seethe. But she wouldn't be seething and be hateful towards her dad that just gave her a beating. Rather, she would direct it towards her mom for not doing anything, for not standing up to her dad. And from the research that I find online, as I mentioned, I haven't read the whole book, so I don't have this part of the story, but none of the research documents say that she in any way reflected that her mom might have been getting the worst of it. So A, there was never a recognition that maybe she should be hateful towards her dad as well, and B, there was just never a recognition that her mom might have been in a domestic violence situation, and yes, probably should have been protecting the children from the dad, but then that would result in her getting beaten. Velma started school in 1939 when she was 7 years old, and at first she loved it. I mean, it was an escape from home, from the dad's beatings, from her mom constantly wanting her to help out on the farm, because, child labor in the 30s was a thing. And she was smart, she was excelling, the teachers loved her. But then lunch breaks would happen, and she just realized she isn't even remotely as well off as some people in this school. Like, she would have a packed lunch and people would obviously mock her for that. Like, oh, you bring lunch from home, you don't have money for the candies because children are cruel. So soon enough, she kind of started withdrawing and would go to the toilet, go to a parking lot to eat her lunch. And then she was like, you know what? Why don't I go for my father's pockets from the odd coins, things that he won't notice. And then I will go before school, buy candy, and I can actually join my classmates, maybe share some candy. They will think that suddenly the situation is improving. Soon, of course, that wouldn't be enough. So she went to this elderly neighbor's house and she stole $80 from him, which even today would be like, okay, don't steal $80, but back then that was probably in the range of $200 to $300 today. So she stole a lot of money from this man. So of course, when the neighbor told the dad, she got a beating like she had never had in her life, and that kind of stopped the stealing for a while. So Velma went back to not really liking the time she's spending in school, and she really did not like the time that she was spending at home. Because with age, she got more and more responsibilities because she was the second child, so she had to take care of her younger siblings, help around on the farm, and she couldn't really complain because then the dad would beat the shit out of her. There are two versions of their family life that came to light once the events of this story developed. One would be from her siblings. They would say, yes, both mom and dad made us work on the farm, they were both stern, we did get the beatings. But also our dad would bring us to the local pond in the summer to swim, he would organize baseball games, and Velma participated. She was happy to be in all of this. And then Velma's version of events was that everything was just dark. Beyond just being overworked by both of her parents, Velma started saying that at night her dad would enter her room. And then at first what she described was that she didn't know whether it was sexual assault, but then it just escalated and she knew that something was wrong, that she knew that her dad was raping her. This could very well be true. I don't want to dismiss somebody, and we should always trust the victim and look into it further, but this is also only Velma's account of events. Nobody else said that they have experienced anything of the sort, and well, they said that Velma didn't either. And when people look at this particular family, they can see many traits characteristic of incestuous families, like the severe power imbalance between husband and wife, the father that would drink heavily. But on the other end of the spectrum, Velma's later actions in life will show you that she was a manipulator from very early age. I am personally not fully dismissive of this just because of what she does next. Usually people that go through something this traumatic that they can't process, their grades go down, their grades go to shit, and they start like finding an outlet. So they drown into something else, something that will bring them any form of pleasure. And for Velma, that is exactly what happened. Her grades went down and she just started sort of neglecting school, but she started playing basketball and was really fast and really good at it. And that wasn't really the norm in the first place for a female playing basketball in the 40s, but she seemed to be really good. That is until her mom asked her to quit. Because she has just given birth to twins, so she needed help around the house, and she needed Velma to help like the older children with the homework, and then to help the dad around the farm, and then to help out with the twins as well. And Velma was, of course, devastated by this. She just found something she was passionate about, and now her mom, yet again, has taken it away from her. And this time she will turn to that very school to find her escape. Because, you see, one of her friends kind of approached her and said, "Hey, didn't you tell me you have a crush on this guy who is just a bit older than us, Thomas Burke?" And Velma was like, "Yeah, like, wait, what, did you speak with him?" And she said, "Yeah, he has a crush on you as well." So Thomas and Velma started flirting. Soon the two of them started dating, and Murphy, Velma's dad, said, "Listen, I'm gonna set up the curfew, you need to come by 10 p.m. No dating until you're 16. And then Velma came home, she was like, "Hey dad, I'm 16 now, I can date now." It's like, no, still trying to be stern, but it was like, oh, I said it. So, okay, setting up the curfew, you need to only double date with other people, no touchy play. If you want to live in this house, these are the rules, you respect them or you get out. And of course, at first, Velma went along with it. But then at the age of 17, she was just fed up with this. So she said to Thomas, "Listen, can we just get married so that I can escape from this household? Like, I'm so fed up with just overworking, going to school, and also just helping with everything at this house. So I think it's a better solution for me to drop out of school and then just marry you." And Thomas was like, "Sure, I guess. We are dumb and it's 40s. We don't know better. Let's do it." In 1951, Velma gave birth to her son, Ronald Thomas. And by September 1953, she would also give birth to her second child, the girl that they named Kim. And you know how we always want to be the better parents than our parents were, Even if they weren't shit parents, even if it is just for us to spite them and be like, "Hey, I'm doing this the way I wanted you to do it for me." Well, Velma was that kind of parent. She was a stay-at-home mom. Thomas had odd jobs here and there that were never well off, but still a bit better of a situation because it was just the two of them and the two kids. And Velma, by all accounts, was a great mom. She started instilling Christian values into her kids from the very young age. And she was one of those moms that was super involved. In school, when they would have parents meetings, she would be the first one to lift her hand up, be like, "Yep, if they need transport, I'll drive them somewhere. Oh, extracurricular activities, I'll organize it, don't worry about it. Cookie sale, amazing, I'm on it." Around this time also somebody approached her and asked her "Hey, do you want this job? It's an odd shift, but it can work around your hours. It's midnight to 8 a.m. at this textile plant." And Velma accepted, they did need the extra cash. Thomas at that time was working as a delivery driver for Pepsi Cola. And they had enough money to move to this more comfortable house in Parkton area. And for a couple of years, they were just the happiest, most normal family. That is until Velma's health took a turn for the worse. She had to go through a hysterectomy. I'm not really sure why. She probably did have some health issues that required her to remove her uterus. But this really took a toll on her. Health-wise, like she started having back problems and kind of wasn't as mobile and as energetic as she was before. But also she thought just like even the idea, of the operation and what it really means would make her feel less womanly and would make Thomas see her as less of a woman. Maybe that he wouldn't have like any sexual desires towards her. And he really didn't do much to stop her from thinking that. Thomas joined the JCs, which is this leadership training and civic organization, and Velma just started seething because now he would be at home even less and less, and he had to commit to all these outside activities, which he didn't really even have to do, but chose to do himself, which just made her think, okay, so yes, I am not desirable anymore, he doesn't want to be with me anymore, so everything that I'm thinking is correct. And one thing that Thomas would do after those JC meetings, he would meet up with his buddies for a couple of drinks, and Velma hated it. First of all, her father was a drunk, but then also her Christian values made her believe that this is the devil's work. So she just started bickering every single time. And it didn't help when Thomas actually had a car crash. He said that he fell asleep at the wheel, that he was exhausted, but Velma said, no, you must have been drunk. This is it, you need to quit this, you need to stop drinking. Due to this car accident though, Thomas actually had a concussion. So in order to deal with pain, in order to deal with headaches, with dizziness that came with it, he just started drowning in alcohol even more as a coping mechanism. And because of this, there were arguments in the household, day in, day out. Velma started suffering mentally, like she was suffering with stress. So she actually went to see a doctor who prescribed her different sedatives, different vitamins, but then she grew addicted to those drugs. So she went back to the doctor who then prescribed her Valium. This did not help much, and Ronnie actually remembers this event where he came home and found his mother just lying on the floor. So in panic, he calls the ambulance, they bring her in, and the doctors actually had to recommend that she stays in the hospital for a week. They again treat her with vitamins, with sedatives, and before they release her, they prescribe her a mild tranquilizer called Librium. After being released from the hospital, Velma just continues her life as normal. So the day of the April the 4th, 1969 was just a regular day. She wakes the kids up, drives them to school, and then goes to this laundromat. And after laundromat, she's just carrying her laundry, going home, and she drops that basket because she sees that the whole house is engulfed in flames. So she calls the firefighters, and she's panicked, losing her mind because she realizes her husband might still be inside. And yes, apparently the house did catch fire, and Thomas Burke died of smoke inhalation on that day. After Thomas's death, of course, she now had no house, nowhere to stay but her parents' place. So she moves with Ronnie and Kim to her parents' house, and of course she knew that this just had to be temporary. She can't be staying with her parents any further than she has to, and she started immediately looking for an escape in the form of a second husband. This is when she met a widower called Jennings Barfield. He took early retirement because of the amount of health problems he had. He suffered from diabetes, emphysema, and heart disease. The two of them might have taken to one another because of the mutual grief, because they were both widowers. But Velma, because of her situation, because she didn't want to stay with her parents, rushed into this completely. Soon enough, the two of them were married, living together, and both of them kind of started immediately speaking with their best friends, saying that they think that this might have been a mistake. On Velma's part, she had to take care of him and the kids. So she just saw herself in the form of a caretaker, which is something she was running from. And on Jennings's part, well, Velma was overdosing on the drugs that she had been prescribed. And he would literally find her collapsed on the floor, freak out, call the ambulance. She would say that she is going to stop, but then she wouldn't stop. It would just repeat itself. Meaning that soon it just started being the question, like, who is going to submit the divorce papers first? But before any of them could submit the divorce papers, Jennings Barfield died on March the 21st, 1971. The cause of death was stated to be heart failure, and we know he suffered from that for a couple of years. After Jennings' death, Velma's state of mind just worsened. She was grief-stricken, but also still overdosing on the pills and just drowning in that. Now she also had to find a job, and her managers at this place where she worked, called Belk's department store, said they kind of had to demote her in a way. They had to put her in the stockroom. They were sympathetic towards her. Now she's a single mom. 2 of her husbands have died, and she has 2 kids to take care of. But they said they had to do it. They couldn't have her on the floor because she would snap at customers. Her moods were all over the place, and they just had to put her in the non-customer facing environment. A few months after Jennings' death, Velma also was overjoyed because of her son's achievements. Ronnie was graduating from high school as a salutatorian, and he made his mom the center of his speech. He paid tribute to her, saying that she was the reason of all the good qualities that he possessed. So she's listening to this speech, obviously feeling overjoyed, feeling like finally somebody's grateful for everything that I have been doing. Finally somebody appreciates me. Few months after this, Velma yet again arrives home to find it engulfed in flames. Luckily here nobody was actually inside, but what this meant is that while they were waiting for the insurance payout, they had to move back with Velma's parents. And this is the time when the tensions between Velma and Ronnie kind of started. Not because of anything that Ronnie did, mostly because of how Velma thought of any actions by her son. You see, Vietnam War was raging, so Ronnie knew that he will be drafted, so he just realized, okay, I might as well sign up. And Velma started losing it over this. She was like, no, I'm spooked already, 2 of my husbands have died, now what? You're going to go to war and inevitably die, I'm going to lose my son as well? She said, Ronnie, listen, you can be honorably opted out of this. Just go declare that your mother is unhealthy, you need to stay behind and take care of her. So the doctors did write a note, but it actually didn't work, and he was ordered to report to Fort Jackson in South Carolina. It seemed though that even if the Vietnam War doesn't draft him, that Velma might lose her son. Not in a morbid way that you might be thinking, but it was probably as morbid and as serious to Velma as it is to so many people. That is because Ronnie decided to get married, and he obviously went to his dear mom, Mommy Dearest, to ask for the blessing, and she said no. I'm not giving you the blessing. She pulled the classic telenovela mom, being like, now you won't love me at all. I was the most important woman in your life, and now you're just going to neglect me when you go to live with this woman. And he just tried to explain that this is not how life works. But she wouldn't relent, and she really hated both the ideas of him going to war, but somehow even worse, the idea of him marrying, because then who is going to take care of her? Luckily for Velma, Ronnie was discharged from the army, but the troubles didn't stop there. Velma at this point was forging prescriptions for her to just feed her addiction, and she was caught once. She didn't serve any time, she just got a fine, but she was still back living with her parents. And at this point her dad had lung cancer, so she had to stay there to care for him. Unfortunately, Velma couldn't really do much. It's cancer, the treatments just didn't really exist at the time, so her dad soon passed away. And now she was left to take care of her elderly mother, who also started falling mysteriously ill. And this wasn't an easy task. Velma's mom, Lily, started complaining about the most painful cramps that she ever had. She would have diarrhea. Velma had to take care of her while in bed, to bring her to the toilet back and forth to make sure that she is fed. And Lily was snappy. She liked to boss her around the same way that she did when Velma was a child. She would tell her what needs attending at the farm, she would tell her what she needs, and also would snap at Velma because Velma was still overdosing and would sometimes just collapse on the floor. So Lily was telling her, well, if you collapse, if I am like literally bedridden, who is going to take care of me? You need to stop taking drugs, this is what you need to do. And Velma hated it. In summer of 1974, Lily's symptoms just intensified. She was in a really critical state, to the point that Velma actually had to bring her to the hospital. But they just ran tests on her, couldn't really see anything, couldn't diagnose her with anything. So she returned home. And for some time, she was feeling better. But at that same time, in August that year, the guy that Velma was actually seeing, she wasn't married to this guy, had a car accident and passed away, with Velma being the beneficiary of his life insurance policy, leaving her with around $5,000, which then she could, spend caring for her mother. But I just find bizarre the unlucky streak of this woman. This is why you gotta have positive force. Force them onto you, and then positive things will happen. Because if everything is negative, people start dying. Not to be too dramatic, but people start dying. A few days after Christmas, Velma made a phone call to her brother, being frantic, saying that the mom is in the worst state than ever. So the brother came there to assess, and he was like, what are you doing? Call the ambulance. She's literally going to die if we don't do anything. So Velma did call the ambulance, and her mother, Lily, actually died 2 hours after reaching the hospital. And if the Scorpios don't want you in the New Year's, they will get rid of you. They don't care about the holiday season. They will get rid of you so that they don't bring you into the New Year's. The doctors here all suspected gastroenteritis, but they weren't fully able to diagnose her, and the autopsy just never got performed. So Velma just moves on, and because she was forging checks, forging prescriptions, in 1975 she actually had to serve 6 months in prison. And once she gets released, she starts a job as a home health nurse for an elderly couple. These were 94-year-old Montgomery Edwards and his 84-year-old wife, Dolly. Both of them were in really bad conditions. Montgomery was bedridden, he was also a diabetic, he lost his vision, and both of his legs had to be amputated, so he couldn't really even feed himself. And Dolly was in a bit of a better shape, but she was a cancer survivor and also had a colostomy. And just like Velma had issues with her own mother, Dolly here was sort of a mother figure, or possibly that is how she saw her, because she immediately started having quarrels with her. She called her a nitpicker, like she was nitpicking everything that Velma was doing. And Dolly, in no uncertain terms, told Velma that she is shit at her job. So she would continue working for them, but soon just like the tensions were flying high. And to make matters worse, Montgomery died in 1977, which only left Dolly and Velma just bickering on the daily. It didn't take long, actually only a few months. In February 1978, Dolly started getting sick. Very similar symptoms that her mother Lily had. Vomiting, diarrhea, just stomach cramps, and luckily Dolly actually had a son, so she would complain to him about all these pains. So on one occasion, this son actually came to visit Dolly, and he said, Velma, we need to bring her to the hospital. She's pale, she doesn't really look good. So of course, Velma is the caretaker, she has to oblige, so she rings the ambulance. She was treated in the emergency room, and the doctors decided she doesn't have to stay overnight, so just bring her home. But that evening, things took to the worse in the hands of Velma, and the next day she was brought to the ambulance again, and she died there. Soon Velma found another caregiver job, caring for another elderly couple, 80-year-old farmer John Henry Lee and his 76-year-old wife Record. Record recently broke her leg. Do not do it. She was a broken record. Do not. She was a broken record. Do not. This is why you're going to hell. This is why you're going to hell. She was a broken record. What a cool name, though. Shut the fuck up. A Record, apparently the person with the coolest name, has broken her leg, so she really needed somebody to literally help her on with her crutches. Here the problems were that Record liked to chat constantly. She was a broken record, everything fits, everything fits. She just liked to gossip, liked to incessantly just gab, and Velma hated that. And another thing she didn't like is that the couple argued, and she would usually witness the arguments and then wouldn't really know what to do with herself. But what Record in particular and the couple noticed was that some of their checks got claimed without Record signing them. So that is probably why she started arguments with her husband. But unfortunately, before Record could do anything about those checks, they started having bigger worries on their hands because John started getting sick. Something I noticed when researching this was the amount of months that all of these people were sick for. It was in April that John first started being admitted to the ambulance. Yet again, they would release him to Velma's care. Then he would be great for a couple of days. Then it would worsen again. He would go stay at the hospital for a couple of days, then be released home. And finally, one last time that the ambulance was called was on June the 4th. Just wanted to point that out because even with the victims that she isn't really close with, it still takes a few months. The longest was obviously her mom. That lasted all the way between summer and Christmas, so that took probably the longest time. Just yet again speaking about the calculation and how Velma had the patience to do this right in order not to be discovered. Just after the funeral of John Henry Lee, Velma actually moved into the home of her new boyfriend, Stuart Taylor. This move might have actually saved Record Lee. I haven't found in any of my articles that she has died in Velma's hands, so I just wanted to point that out because I looked for that myself. It did not take long for the problems in the relationship with Stuart Taylor to start. It was already in February 1978 when he discovered that she had been forging checks. So he struck up the argument with her. It was like, well, you're forging signature on these checks, you're cashing my money out. Why can we just discuss this? It's fine, can you just ask for money? What are you using it for? And she didn't really give him the answer, but she did give him a beer to drink before church service. And after the church service, he started profusely sweating, immediately having stomach issues. She actually had to drive them home. She was kind of telling him, you don't have to act tough, I will take care of you. And then drove him home. And of course, knew exactly what needs to be done to take care of this kind of health issue. So after the night of hell, after the night of suffering, Stuart literally begs Velma to bring him to the hospital. So she's like, of course, no problem, silly you, it just seems like a flu, but I will. And then at the hospital, the doctors are saying, we do suspect gastritis, ever heard of it, Velma? She's like, I might have read about this in a biology book or something, might have really distant memory, can't really remember that much about it. So the doctors again give him the medication, tell him to take it, to just go home, sleep it off, and in the morning he will feel better. But here she didn't waste any time whatsoever. Here, as soon as they got home, he just started feeling worse, and whatever she was giving him to eat and drink just made him feel worse. So during the night, Velma actually called his daughter Alice. And Alice was pregnant at the time. Velma called her just in the middle of the night just to sort of touch base and alert her that her husband is actually in critical health. But then Alice did call her back the next morning and they kind of both just brushed it off. They were like, it's flu. He's gonna be okay. For me, it is really the communications between the doctors that she has and between the family members that just make me want to punch her in the freaking nozzle. Because she knows she needs to put up this charade for this to continue. She knows she needs to go to these doctors and act all innocent, act like nothing is happening, and then to go to these family members and just start sort of unraveling the story just so that she can have backup later and say, well, it was just a flu that progressed and led to him dying. And with this particular victim, with Stuart, it was escalating to that point that, first of all, notice the time span. then it's shortened by literally a couple of days. And also here, it isn't just the doctor and the family member. Next person she goes to was Stuart's best friend. So she goes to visit him, immediately alerts him like, hey, maybe you should come visit him. He really seems to be worse off. It really doesn't look good. Go speak to him. And basically, well, on Stuart's deathbed, really, this guy comes along. Stuart asks him to take care of like the pigs while he's ill, just thinking, okay, this is like the worst case of flu that I have had, but I will get better. But the next day he doesn't get better, so Velma has to bring him to the hospital again. And here she starts to tell doctors she doesn't really know him that well, and she doesn't really know of his medical history to this degree. Velma yet again does the same thing. She calls his daughter, she calls his son. They all come to the hospital. But here they dispatch Stuart, they just give him some meds and write him off. But a couple of days later, the emergency services will be called again, and this time Stuart Taylor died yet again in the emergency services with Velma by his side. At Stuart's funeral, everybody seemed to be supportive. Everybody seemed to be so grief-stricken for Velma because ever since she lost her first husband, Thomas Burke, everything just seems to be going downhill for the woman. It just seems to be such bad luck that she has happened to lose every single one of her husbands to this disease that has swept the nation, apparently. Everybody that is, apart from one person that while the funeral is happening, happens to ring the police department. Velma was a murderer, the voice on the other end of the line said to the police officer. She killed her mother and then she killed Stuart Taylor. And the police officer asked her, well, how would you know this? To which the person on the other end of the line said, I am Velma's sister. According to Jerry Bledsoe's death sentence, this woman didn't give any further details. They could never confirm whether or not she was actually Velma's sister or how Velma's sister would know this kind of information. But she revealed that she was calling from South Carolina but couldn't give her name. She also said she was pretty sure those weren't the only people that died in Velma's care. She informed the police that Velma actually cared for 2 elderly couples and they should look into those as well. So the police now started taking a second look at all of the death certificates surrounding the people that the sister on this call alerted them to. And they noticed no tests were ever done for poison. Rather, the cause of death just read gastroenteritis, gastroenteritis, gastroenteritis for every single one of them. They were like, okay, we gotta get some autopsies done. And while the autopsies are getting done, they bring in Velma for a police interrogation. They decided, let's bring her in and let's question her for these bad checks. And then just suddenly surprise her and ask her about the death of Stuart Taylor. When they were questioning her about the checks, of course, Velma had a story to tell, like, yes, she has been forging checks, she served time in prison, she isn't doing it any longer. Now, when the topic changes to Stuart Taylor, the officer straight up asked her, do you know he died from arsenic poisoning? And Velma was stunned. And she sort of was like, no, of course not. And then she just snapped. She thought, okay, they're suspecting me. So she just says, you think I poisoned him, don't you? She tells them, what do I gain from killing him? I gain nothing. I was the one to nurse him to health. I was the one to ring the ambulance. Like, how dare you? And she's like, well, if you're not arresting me, I'm getting out because I'm pissed off now. So she goes out and she calls her son, Ronnie. And she tells Ronnie, like, what the cops were questioning her. She says, yes, I did forge those checks to, like, supply my drug addiction. Like, drugs are expensive. These medications that they have prescribed me were expensive. But, like, I have nothing to do with this. She just sounded distraught. So Ronnie offered to visit her, to go to her house, to just, like, speak to her, to calm her down. He thought there's nothing to these claims. Like, he knew his mother her whole life. She has cared for her grandparents, for him and Kim, then for like the elderly people as well as all of the sick husbands. Who in the right mind would actually be thinking that Velma killed Stuart Taylor? Velma goes to speak to her son Ronnie, who at the time was actually living with his wife and had a baby, had a toddler. So at least she didn't manage to ever convince him not to get married. And she's discussing maybe like what if this does go to trial, what if they have any evidence. And Ronnie is there being completely oblivious, saying there's no need to even hire an attorney. Like, what are you talking about? This is just gonna be brushed off. Like, if they had something, they would have already arrested you. Which, I mean, clearly they don't have anything because you're innocent, right, Mom? She's like, yeah, of course, of course. But of course Ronnie was wrong, because the very next Monday he's sitting at work and he gets a call from a woman that says that she knows somebody in the sheriff's department and that she thinks Ronnie ought to know that they plan to arrest her mother. So Ronnie is of course distressed. He's like, okay, who are you? Tell me like more details. But they actually just hang up on him. So he tells his boss he has an emergency at home and he goes to visit his mom. And Velma, at the moment, was living with a woman named Mommy Warwick, who was a senior citizen. She was living with her rent-free, just helping her out with some household chores. So yet again, she was just living in a caregiver role with somebody who could also potentially be a victim. And Velma was having a nap, so Ronnie woke her up and said, Mom, like, this is what I've heard. I mean, I can't believe they're about to arrest an innocent person. And she's just there kind of nodding, and then she starts sobbing and just whispering. She says, I only wanted to make him sick. So now Ronnie is sick to his stomach and he says, I need to drive you to the police station. Like, otherwise I'm going to be seen as an accomplice. And, well, one thing that we know is that Velma wouldn't have wanted that. So he does drive her to the police station and just goes home, like sort of informs his sister Kim and like nieces, nephews, because he believed like the families do need to stick together during these times. And as he is at home, he gets another phone call. And this was the investigator Al Parnell on the other end of the line telling him it's worse than what we thought. There are other people she's killed. He told him that Velma, while in custody, confessed to killing 2 people who she was live-in caregiver to, and also her mother, Lily Bullard. Around that same time, they also received Stuart Taylor's autopsy, and that just confirmed that he had arsenic in his system. So at least they had the modus operandi of all of her kills. Now, what they were looking for was the motivation. Because as I told you, certain people that she killed, she could have benefited more from them alive than dead, in terms of cashing out checks, stealing from them. As bad as it is, they were elderly people, they were vulnerable and easy targets. She didn't have to go through and kill any of them. But she did say she did kill them for exactly that reason, to cover up the fact that she was stealing money, because A, then she would be caught if somebody reported her to the police, but also because she found it would be an embarrassment for somebody to discover that she is actually cashing out these checks to support her drug use. She said she never killed her first 2 husbands, Thomas Burke and Jennings Barfield. I don't see her starting off with arson. Just personally, having some insight into psychology and having researched plenty of these cases, starting off with arson and then moving on to poisoning. But then you kind of have to think, why were there a couple of house fires in her life? Was that just a pure coincidence? Or was something else happening? Maybe she just didn't follow the MO and the sequence of events that we are familiar with. The police actually did exhume Jennings' body and they found arsenic in his system, but somehow she was never tried for any of the other kills. And other bodies haven't been exhumed, so she has only been charged and tried for Stuart Taylor's murder. And so we go to trial. The prosecutor in Velma's case was this guy called Joey Freeman Britt. And this guy apparently was a huge advocate of capital punishment and was actually even dubbed the world's deadliest prosecutor. He gained that reputation by prosecuting 13 first-degree murder trials within 17 months and winning convictions in all of those cases. He decided to put these doctors on the stand, and these were the doctors that were present in Stuart Taylor's death, that witnessed her bringing him to the hospital, calling all of the family members. And what they said was so impactful because they said she could have actually saved his life. There was an antidote for arsenic poisoning called British anti-Levisite. But the test that they have had at the time couldn't have picked up arsenic in somebody's system. So the only way for them to actually know they should inject this person with the antidote would be if Velma told them, which she didn't do. Then the defense lawyer in the cross-examination asked these doctors what about the amount of drugs that Velma was taking. So some doctors did admit that yes, the amount of drugs, the combination of them could have impaired her judgment. And they were also extremely addictive, so her behavior did make sense, but they just never changed any of the drugs. Velma's defense attorney also decided to take a risk, which is usually not what you do, putting the guilty party on the stand, but he decided to go through with it. In order for people to understand the reasoning behind Velma saying, well, she just wanted to make him sick, and the reasoning why she didn't actually report anything to anybody, why she didn't flag it and say anything to the medical assistants, to the doctors and nurses. And she said she was really fearing going back to prison. She's been there for 6 months, as we know, for forging checks, and she didn't want to go back. And she continued forging checks because she had limited resources and couldn't actually support her drug use. Now that Velma is on the stand, of course, this top-notch prosecutor, Britt, has a shot at her, and of course he knows what he's doing. So he just started tearing off these different layers of masks that Velma would put up. Oh, a nice Christian lady, a sweet grandma that nobody would suspect of. And her argument was that all of the autopsies at first indicated natural deaths, hence why nobody looked at her. So she said, "What I would like, Your Honor, to say to the jury and all, these autopsies, let me say first of all, when a person dies and they ask you for an autopsy to be performed, is it not true that we have an autopsy performed to find out the reason of the death? So I don't believe it killed them really. That is exactly the way I feel about it." Which Britt exploited because clearly she's trying to still stick to she only thought it would make them sick, which would just give her more work. So he started digging and asking her more questions. He said, "You made Mrs. Edwards sick with rat poison, didn't you?" To which her response was, "No, I thought this was roach and ant poison." So Britt is like, "Okay, so you knew that this poison would make people sick?" To which she said yes. After which he said, "So you knew it would kill them too?" She said, "No, I did not know that." But by this point, all of the masks were just off. And to be fair to Velma on one point, she didn't really have the best defense attorney. This guy's name was Bob Jacobson, and previously he had never tried a death penalty case. He tried to prove that she did not mean to kill, only to render them ill, while she was attempting to cover up all of these thefts and getting money out of them. And if he managed to prove that, then she would only be charged with a second-degree murder, so death sentence would be off the table. And of course, he argued that the jury shouldn't hear about all of the other evidence, about all of the other poisonings, because his client is only being tried for one single murder. But the prosecutor managed to convince the judge to admit into evidence all of the autopsies and all of the witness statements about the deaths of John Henry Lee, Dottie Edwards, and Velma's own mother. And this will be enough to show the pattern, to show the MO, to show the lack of remorse, the lack of empathy, all of that the prosecution was counting on. And another thing that the prosecution knew that they had as a win was the fact that none of these medical professionals that they had on the stand could render her impaired or say that she was mentally insane in any way. They could not go for the insanity defense. She was capable, she was functioning, she was working during all these years, taking care of all these different households, getting married and divorced, so that couldn't really work as her defense. And as the cherry on the top, as the prosecutor made his summation to the jury, The jury also spotted Velma just sitting at her desk making a round of applause, like, ah. And they were like, okay, so she's applauding to the prosecution's account of events? Well, she might have just as well dug her own grave. So Brit was elated and the defense attorney was there like, I should never defend serial killers again. So of course, after that act, the jury did come back and they gave her first-degree murder, and then in the second trial, they gave her the death penalty. And when sentenced, Velma was the only female in the state of North Carolina on the death row. She was housed in the Central Prison section, which is the section dedicated to mental cases, especially assaultive inmates and prisoners considered prone to escape. And listen, if I have had to hear her speak, so do you. Because just tell me that this does not feel like you have wasted even 10 seconds of your life. I have heard like her whole interview. I will not put you through it. Just listen to her describing her time in prison.
Corrections officials, she was moved to Raleigh's Central Prison, where she is the only woman prisoner. She now waits in virtual isolation in a cell just across from the execution chamber. A constant reminder, she says, of her likely fate.
It's total, isolation from everybody that I had been with for almost 6 years. The first week I was here was the worst week that I have spent.
Barfield says drugs led her to prison. She became addicted to tranquilizers, she says, during a rocky period in her life.
The last 10 years was just like that. Years of a drug nightmare. Days of not knowing where you are or what you've done.
Days of drug nightmare. We do love to slur our words. You actually cannot impersonate anybody else. It always sounds like Herbert the pervert. It always sounds a bit like Herbie. Just like her fellow Scorpio that I also covered on this channel, Carla Faye Tucker, Velma had become a born-again Christian in jail. Now you are thinking, Maja, but she was always Christian, like she practiced this faith her whole life. Yeah, but she said that she was never a true Christian. You see, it was all just matter of form, matter of gesture, but now she has asked Jesus for forgiveness and she knows that she has received it. So she knows that now for sure she opened her heart to Jesus and received forgiveness and salvation. For 6 years that she was on the death row, she of course exhausted all of her appeals. The basis for her appeals came in two forms. The first one was the relationship she has formed with this evangelist Billy Graham. Apparently this guy is like super famous. I looked him up, huge on Google, huge. He made an effort to vouch for Barfield and also to ask for her to get commutation to life imprisonment. So none of them was actually fighting for her to be released. They just, of course, wanted the death penalty off the table. And the second basis for her appeal was the testimony of Dorothy Otnov-Lewis, who is a professor of psychiatry at New York University School of Medicine. And she claimed that Barfield suffered from dissociative identity disorder. She said she would come and speak with Barfield, and often Velma would speak about her different personality called Billy, who told her that Velma had been a victim of sexual abuse and that Billy had killed her abusers. And this woman said, well, she should get life imprisonment because she did start by killing off the abusers. That she doesn't care if it is Velma or if it is this second personality that lives within her. But then I don't think they took into consideration that so many other of Velma's victims weren't abusive, even if the first one was to end up being true. And if she did kill her father and then killed her mother because she wasn't standing up for her daughter, nobody else was abusing Velma in any form. She also says she found a meaning in her limited life on the death row by helping other prisoners. She would often write letters for them and was really surprised by how many of them were actually illiterate. And because of the section of the prison that she was in, she wasn't actually even supposed to have access to other inmates, but the prison guards actually broke the rule a few times because she was such a great influence on all of these people, with her Christian faith and helping them out, reach out to their families, and again manipulating the situation completely. The rest of her time was occupied crocheting, writing family letters to her own family or to the inmates' families on their behalf, helping them out spiritually, reading the Bible, praying every day, and also working with the pastor on her memoirs called Woman on Death Row. She actually even ended up admitting to this minister who helped her write the book that she murdered Jennings Barfield. And her son actually said, this isn't written anywhere else but in like a few articles, that when he would come to visit, he always tried to get the answer of one question that was bothering him so much, which is, did she actually kill his own father, Thomas Burke? Remember the guy that died in the fire? And eventually she says she doesn't fully remember, but thinks that it might have happened in the haze. She believed that he was drunk yet again, asleep on the bed, and she just lit up the match and threw it at the foot of the bed and left home to go to that laundromat. This didn't even have to come to light though. She already exhausted all of her appeals, so she actually had to write the letter to the governor at the time, James Hunt. Unfortunately for her, there were some elections happening at the time, so of course this governor had to act maybe even tougher on crime that he usually would have, and he said that she actually tortured these people to death, so no, he's not going to just offer her any clemency or try to influence the judge to lower this to the life sentence. So as she was preparing for death, she was able to speak over the phone with the evangelist Billy Graham, who said, "Velma, in a way I envy you, because you are going to get into the heaven before I do." Later she spoke to his daughter, who shared the opinion and said, "Don't think of it as an execution chamber, think of it as a gateway to heaven." This conversation with Billy Graham happened on November the 2nd, 1984, because we come to the moment that we have been waiting for, that we have all gathered here for, and that is the last meal. So let's see, her last meal, yeah. We have Cheetos. Woo, Cheetos, camera, show us. And we have the good old Coca-Cola. Let me open this because it's gonna mask the sound. Oh, the smell is already, already an experience. Let's do some good old ASMR like Katie Up. Have you watched that video? As a reminder, I do last meals so that I can put myself in the position, in the mindset of the people who have committed these bad deeds, who have requested this particular thing as their last meal, because usually it is their comfort food, usually it is something they like to eat as children, and sometimes they go all out. Velma here was pretty cheap. Most of the sources online said it's either Cheetos and Coke, and then the equal amount of sources said it was cheese doodles and Coke. I don't think they sell cheese doodles brand here in the UK, so this is what I have. I like the texture. I like the texture. I don't like the taste. I think it's because husband got flaming hot Cheetos. Like he doesn't know me. Who do I even live with? Okay, so she ate her last meal. And as she was doing this, the crowd was forming on the outside. So the crowd started gathering outside of the prison walls, and around 300 of them were begging for her life. They were protesting against the death penalty, but then around 80 of them just wanted to hear the news of her death, and they were chanting, "Die, bitch, die." As she had final visits from her friends and family, she repeated the pastor's words, saying that they shouldn't be worried about her because when she enters the execution chamber, she will be entering a gateway to heaven. In her cell, she took the final communion, she put a diaper underneath the pajamas that she was to die in, and she was led to the execution chamber. She was then taken into the preparation room where they asked her if she had any last words. And these were her last words, and it's long, and I just really wanna eat this, but hey. "I want to say that I'm sorry for all the hurt that I have caused. I know that everybody has gone through a lot of pain, all the families connected, and I'm sorry. And I want to thank everybody who has been supporting me all these 6 years. I want to thank my family for standing with me through all this, and my attorneys and all the support to me, everybody, the people with the prison department. I appreciate everything, their kindness, and everything that they have shown me during these 6 years. I mean, she isn't really a literary genius. Why did we expect her to be a literary genius, man? After she received the lethal injection, she was asked to count backwards from 100, and as she did that, she started slurring the words, and at 2:15 a.m. on November the 2nd, 1984, she was pronounced dead. She was 52 years old when she was executed, and only a few days really after her 52nd birthday, which is a bummer, man. It's truly what people like this deserve, or do they? As you know, I ain't pro-death penalty, but some of you might think so. Interestingly, with Velma, she was actually dispatched to this medical school right after the execution because she actually wanted her organs to be donated, so they immediately started removing them for the transplants. And the death row granny has finally met her punishment. So that is the case of Velma Barfield. When I first heard the name, I was like, is it Wilma? Like Wilma Flintstone? Wilma Flintstones. Da 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 da. That's not how a song goes. You have no perception of rhyme. Or reason, for that matter. You know, for somebody that apparently doesn't like Cheetos, I am almost finished with this whole packaging. But now it's time for us to part ways. I have to literally take my clothes off and just like do the little swinging so that all of the Cheetos get off it. Because this isn't clothes camera friendly food. I think this is the food you eat on the streets when you walk by. Oh, Velma, she probably died with sticky fingers. What did you think about this case? How many murders do you believe she actually committed? Do you believe she committed those arsons as well? Or was she innocent of those crimes? Do you believe that she was actually sexually abused as a child? And let me know who do you want me to talk about next. Let me know what you want me to eat next. Hopefully not this. Because this is a nuisance. This is a nuisance. All orange. This hand is just orange. So in the meantime, don't forget to use your own hand to like and subscribe to this video. And also keep cherishing your next meal as if it was your last. And I will see you next week. Don't touch anything. Anything. And you know what having food behind me means. It's a garbage day. It's like the loudest day to record. Sick. And you know what having food behind me means? It is last meals. And you know what having food behind me meals? And well, if you stick around to the end of this story, I believe we're gonna be on the same page that she didn't really go to heaven. She probably did go straight. You know, when on the zodiac charts you find that like negative characteristics? Yeah, this is Velma in a nutshell. She just like does not have like any positive Scorpio personality traits, which are: we are inquisitive, we are decent storytellers, we are revengeful. That is not positive. It's like, I think like you might have mixed them up. Yeah, possessive, jealous, control freaks. That can be both. No, don't fight me. Control freak can be positive. Fight me. Who the fuck is fighting you? Can we speak about Ronnie's mullet for a second? This is the strongest mullet since like Jamie Ray Cyrus. Is that his name? The strongest mullet. Can shit in your life trait? That is not. How is that a positive trait? Literally all of the things you're stating as negative. Do we have positive traits? What are they? Sex drive. That can also be no, I do not accept it. I do not accept any of it. Everything is positive. Anger management issues? Yeah, but also positive, huh? I'm not the biggest fan of Amy Schumer, but she has this one good sketch where she talks about the moms that like just never want their sons to marry. And it is just truly golden because always these moms, literally, it is as if they want to end up fucking their sons. That is what she says. And it is true because, like, why are you not letting them breathe? It's fucking awkward. Like, let them go, let them live. I'm so glad I was born a fucking female because my brother and my mom have kind of a similar relationship. Like, I witnessed it firsthand. I know what I'm talking about, okay? You gotta love how she's thanking her fans. Like, we truly, as Scorpios, live for the fan base. We live for the support. We live for just the performance. Just like, bitch, like, how can you put victims' families and your supporters under inverted commas into the same sentence? Makes no sense. You know who I haven't met yet? Scorpio with a great eyesight. Yeah. I have shitty teeth, so I always thought like all of the Scorpios do because logic. But no, hey, sexual prowess? Yes. Bad teeth? Apparently not. Husband is a Scorpio, has great teeth. Not this bitch. Just like Carla Faye Tucker, she just replaced freaking dick with Jesus. Like, this is not how life works. Like, girl, just because he's a guy, like, no. Continue being a sexual beast. Like, nobody's gonna buy this. Great at hoeing? Very bad eyesight. Also, smaller lips, and we don't really smile with our teeth. I think this is personal, Maya. I think it's just that you have shit teeth, okay? I have seen Scorpios smiling with like their mouths open. What the fuck?